So I want you to start thinking about that and how the Gallup survey actually helps us to measure some of these things. The bottom line is life is the most important piece. And we want our kids to have the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions that will lead them to a lifetime of active and engaged citizenship, which is what you talked about. So we know that we could not continue to do things the same way. At the same time, we also know that in Florida, there are a lot of things that are mandated, and people don't innovate when they are scared, when they are afraid of taking risks. So our road was really built to bring professionals together. Superintendent Browning talks about all the time how he wanted to bring the professionalism back into the profession. We created structures that would allow us to do that. We created structures that would allow people to come together to study the new standards, to grow professionally, and to exchange ideas. So this year, our focus has been on using the Marzano framework, which was mandated, and turn that around into an opportunity for us to develop a common language of teaching and learning. How can we sit down and talk about what is going on and across buildings, across subject areas, in a manner that helps us move forward? Also, we're telling our teachers, this is about the kids, it's about their work, it's about their learning. So the focus has to be on the learning, not on the teaching. Not teacher-centric, student-centric. And as you visit our schools, you will see to this day that when you are in an elementary building, you will see more collaboration, more child-centric instruction. As you move up, you will see less and less, and we have to change that. More collaboration. Superintendent Browning has talked about the importance of us working together. How does that translate to the students in the classroom? Metacognitive. We want kids not only to work together, but to better understand their own thinking, their own learning. We also want things to be more applied. So how do we bring more experiences, more project-based into the classroom so it's more relevant for students? How do we get kids to ask questions that they really don't know the answer, to be more inquiry-driven? And how do we help our teachers, our schools, our kids, so the day makes more sense? Since the inception of No Child Left Behind, elementary schools have become more like middle schools, and you have 90 minutes of this and then 30 minutes of that. And the day is not integrated. The day does not make sense. That does not help kids learn. So we are trying to move towards a better way. And community-based. We do not feel that learning stops when school is over. We feel it has to be 24/7. But the bottom line is, with everything we're trying to do to make our system a premier system, this is a very confusing time, because what comes at us it is not sometimes conducive to doing what we need to do. And teachers truly feel scared at times. The accountability piece, the evaluation piece, it's hard for them to take risks. So it is important that we measure their engagement, that we see how they are feeling about all of this. The bottom line is there's a big paradox in Florida right now. And they want us to move forward, but they test us in the old way. And that holds us prisoners. And we have to find a way to help our kids be prepared for the future. So we are truly humbled by the task. And that's the reason we asked Gallup to come in and help us. Because if you talk to somebody that says this is easy, it is not true. It is not the case. So as we move forward with the Gallup survey, we want to continue to ask these questions. Are our buildings, are our schools relevant? And our kids, are they seeing that they have a place? Are they engaged? Are they hopeful about their future? So are they relevant? We talk a lot about the shiny device, and we know that things are different, and we know that we have to incorporate technology. But we don't talk about using our computer every day. We want technology to just be a part of their daily life. So will that make a change in hope, engagement, and well-being of students? If we do this right and use technology to create, research, collaborate, present, network, we do believe that with time, we will see an increase on engagement. But we can't forget that we are a human institution. And kids do need us. They need adults. But we have to start changing our language. A lot of times when we talk to teachers, teachers say, I teach math. And we have to help them start saying, I teach kids math. They teach humans. And we are trying to create a caring, respectful, excellent organization. So it is important that we monitor how people are feeling over time. We want our kids to contribute, and we feel that as we go down this road, if we are caring, if we provide kids a chance to develop in areas that they are interested in, and they are able to contribute on things that matter, we will see engagement improving. We also want to see engagement of adults. So we want to monitor over time, are adults feeling more of a part of our organization? Are they truly invested and engaged in our schools, in their work? And what is the impact of that? We also want to share. As we share more, do we feel more engaged? The issue now is, how do we get everybody on the bus? Not everybody is getting on the bus. Not everybody's happy about that. So we feel that collecting the right data is going to help us kind of keep a pulse on our progress over time. As we move forward and we hear our data, it is important for us to remember. Last year when we came in January, we took a pulse on what was going on. At the time, we really, as soon as we came in, Superintendent Browning wanted to see, I want to know where people are. And we didn't have time to really do any research, so we borrowed the survey from Miami-Dade. But after we started talking to people and we began implementation of our initiatives in August, we had time to start looking at what type of data will really help us as an organization to move forward. And we came across Gallup, and we feel that this is going to be the type of data that will make us a great organization. It will help us kind of monitor this. Are people getting on the bus? Are people more engaged? So as we check, are we really getting from there to here or from here to there? Are we making progress? It's important for us to look first from the student perspective. How is hope, engagement, and well-being? But also from the staff perspective, are they engaged in our initiatives? So with that, I'm going to ask Tim Hodges to come up and share with you our baseline. Where are we now and where do we go next?
Well, good morning. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Tim Hodges, and I'm with Gallup. I'm based in Omaha, Nebraska, which will have 3 to 6 inches of snow this afternoon, and hopefully that means the flight from Atlanta to Omaha will still land tonight, because I have a 3-week-old baby that I want to get home to tonight. So I love what I do, though, or I wouldn't leave home with a 3-week-old baby, and certainly we appreciate the opportunity to work with your kids in this project as well. I just want to have Jerlene do a crowd wave here. Jerlene Mosley, many of you have met Jerlene, particularly the directors and the Learning Community Executive Directors. Many of you have gone through Teacher Perceiver or Principal Perceiver or Teacher Insight or Principal Insight back over the 20 plus years of our relationship with the school district. So we appreciate that long-term partnership. I'm probably a new face to most of you, particularly focused on our work with school engagement. We did a staff survey with all of your school-based staff, and then also supplemented that with some central office and some of your itinerant staff and student services. So in November and January, and we'll do a little bit of a walk through the results of that today. We also did a student survey back in November, the Gallup Student Poll, which goes through the hope, engagement, and well-being of students in grades 5 through 12. So I'll also make a couple comments about that and talk about how the two relate to one another. I think if there was one word to describe today, baseline might be that word. This is really a chance to say, where are we today, and what does that look like in the context of the Gallup database and the national landscape around education and so on. The most important comparison point in the data is where we were last year, and we won't know that until next year when we've had some baseline data and then followed through on that. I've been encouraged over the last couple of weeks with the conversations we've had with these four, the Learning Community Executive Directors, and yesterday we had meetings with the with the directors of different departments at the district level, and I'm really excited about the kind of questions that are coming out, and I'm excited about the progress. I love data. I dream in syntax. Surveys are kind of my life. I might be the only one in the room that would say that. Dave lived that world for a while, and Peggy's kind of there now, but most of you don't love surveys for surveys' sake. So I'll talk a little bit today about why this survey in particular should matter because of the relationship it has to the other measures that matter for schools. Glad to have questions throughout. If you'd like to have me pause on a point, I'm glad to kind of unpack that even more. And then, of course, we'll have good discussion and question and answer as we move through. I'd like to start, and I appreciate Ms. Larson for setting it up so well in terms of the landscape of education. I have the opportunity to work with school districts in many states. Probably about half my work is in Maryland, Georgia, Florida, states where there's large county districts similar to yours, some even much larger than this district. And I appreciate that from a data perspective, because when you've got lots of schools in a district, you can really start to understand more about the dynamics and start to study best practices internally. We'll borrow from best practices from all the districts we work with, but over time I think the most compelling stories will be the ones that happen within your schools. So we'll be in touch with you throughout the spring and in ongoing conversations with these four and anyone else around what's happening, which principals, which managers are really making good progress about this, and what are some ideas we can share with others throughout the summer. We've got plans about conversations at your summer conference to continue to unpack this as we go. But just to follow up on Ms. Larson's introduction, I'd like to get you in the mindset of thinking about what is it to be a great place to work? Gallup studied great places to work for many years. I'd like to have just a few words or descriptors when you think of a great workplace. What comes to mind for you?
You feel valued.
You feel valued, yeah. Friendly, uh-huh.
Like to go there every day.
Yeah, you'd go there even if you didn't have to that day, right?
Common goals.
Common goals, yeah, some shared purpose about that. Mm-hmm.
Great boss.
A great boss. Says the aspiring great boss, yes.
We're still looking for that.
Yeah.
We're still looking at that.
There's election in 3 years, right? Yeah.
Right,
2, okay. Yeah, but for sure. And we'll talk about the critical role that managers play, not just the superintendent or the board or the top leadership of the organization, but engagement's something that really happens at the local level. Every school has a story. Every department has a story. Darlene and I just received an email yesterday. Gallup surveys our own engagement of our 2,000 or so associates around the world twice a year. And so we just got our survey results, and we're not perfect at this either. We wrote the book on it. We've been doing it for our entire life, but it's something that you have to pay attention to over time and really be intentional about creating a great place to work. And there's range from one work group at Gallup to another. Even on the floor where our offices are in Omaha, we've got on third floor, there's different work groups that show up there, and they have different needs, and they weigh in different about how those needs are being met. So when we think about schools, an engaged school place is one where the students are excited, the staff are excited, and they feed off of one another in that way. Engagement is really about how involved and enthusiastic you are about your work. Said another way, it's your heart connection to the job. It's not a transactional relationship you have with the job. Clearly that's important. If you're not sure, just skip next month's paychecks and see if anybody notices. There's an exchange kind of relationship we all have with our employers, but it needs to go beyond that if you're going to be engaged. It's possible to be satisfied with your job and not engaged. And you'll see that about half of the American workforce is in that kind of middle camp of being not engaged. They're able to be recruited either to be engaged or to be actively disengaged, which unfortunately creates situations like this. Active disengagement is a frustrating thing that happens in our workplaces. You can probably imagine what this looks like in I don't mean to pick on construction workers, but I will, because sometimes the mistakes that they make are more obvious to some of us. So you'll get it if you haven't yet. But it's all the letters are there, just not necessarily in that order, right? So you've transitioned from a survey and many surveys over the years, and surveys tend to be an iterative process in districts where we like to go back to the surveys, we like to see what works, which items we like. Somebody new joins the assessment team and they've got a survey from where they were before and they'd like to add 10 items, and what we end up with are these bloated surveys with 150 or 200 items that essentially are a couple hours of your life you'll never get back, filling out this long drawn out survey, and then you wonder if anything ever really happened. I would contend if you're not going to do anything with the results of the survey, it's better to not ask in the first place. Because now they know how things are going and how they feel about it. And if you're not doing anything about it, then it's probably worse than not asking in the first place. So I think that puts some pressure on us to really drive some action off of these results. And if done well, the data should drive better discussions and should tweak our progress and tweak the ways that we get towards what success looks like in our school improvement plans and goals for the departments. But Gallup, I'd be a hypocrite to stand up here and say we've always done engagement the way we have. We've been consistent about it for the last 15 or 20 years on what is it about employee engagement that really matters. Are there some core elements that are consistent across workplaces, whether you're a school district, whether you're a bank, whether you're whatever the case might be, whether it's in the Midwest or the Southeast or in Europe or wherever, are there some core attributes about workplaces, basic workplace needs that are important? First Break All the Rules was published in 1999. Marcus Buckingham and Kurt Kaufman were Gallup employees and put together that story along with many others who contributed. And there have been a couple other books and many Wall Street Journal articles and USA Today and everything else. It's hard to pick up an article and not see some reference to employee engagement or having a best friend at work or opportunity to do what you do best or using your strengths. Many of those concepts came from Gallup's work in the mid-90s. And in fact, today Harvard Business Review had an article about employees and that kind of passion about their job, and it's February, so we all talk about love and variations of that as we write articles. But there was some of that like best friend at work or strong workplace connections, and it really has a difference in the bottom line. So, and in how we define success. In schools, it looks something like this. You've got to start with having great leadership in place. And I left the references in there to higher ed as well, because the debate around education quality has some things in common. Our K-12 and higher ed systems have some things in common. It has to start with great leadership that create a great vision and some consistent clarity about what we're here for, what we're about. Then it moves into those engaged adults who are leading our classrooms, whether they're faculty in a higher ed institution or K-12 classroom teachers or paras or counselors, those who interact with students. If they're not engaged in the work that they do, it's very difficult for students to be engaged. We've studied that real specifically, and it's difficult when you've got an actively disengaged teacher to have students who are successful in spite of that teacher. It's easy for students to check out if they pick up on the fact that the adult in the room is also checked out. And clearly, our goal is to have students who are excited, involved with, and enthusiastic about school. We want them to want to be there because we know ideas happen faster, they're more creative, they show up more often, so certainly that's helpful. There's less truancy when students are engaged because they want to be there. There's something about school that's drawing them back day after day, just as the comment earlier about it needs to be a place we want to go. We want school to be a place that kids look forward to going. And we know for some of the kids in your district, many of them perhaps, the time they spend in school is their favorite part of the day. So how can we create schools that are great places to work for staff and great places to learn for students? And that's really what we're after. So just a simple definition to get this on the table, because we look at climate surveys and culture surveys and satisfaction surveys and so on. The definition of engagement is how involved with and enthusiastic you are about your job. Or for students, how involved with and enthusiastic you are about school. So it's not just how many activities are you in, that involvement component, or how many days did you show up, or how many hours did you work. That's a part of it, but it's that enthusiasm that really separates the work that we do. You'll notice that the items are worded in a pretty extreme way because we're trying to evoke some emotion here. And when someone can strongly agree, give a 5 to a difficult item, we know we're really onto something. So when you look at the results, you may see the scores are lower than what you're used to seeing because it's a harder assessment than what you're probably used to seeing staff go through. These are not easy items to get a 5 on, and it's a process of working towards that. Even at, like I say, even at Gallup, where we've been at this for many years, our company average is not a 5.0. We still have employees who say, close but not quite. And that's the other thing I want to comment on. When we do analysis of data, it's important not just to group 4s and 5s together. So we measure it on a 5-point scale, strongly disagree to strongly agree. And a lot of times educators will look at it and say, well, let's take those who are positive in their response to that item, the 4s and 5s, and put them together. We found that a 4 is almost a soft no. So a 5 is I strongly agree. We ring the bell on this, it's definitely right. A 4 is, well, not quite. And so when we look at average scores, we usually see a 3.5 or 3 point something. as the overall district average or company average in other organizations we work with. So to get a 4 is a big deal, and to get a 5 is a really big deal. So in some cases, we'll even look at what % of people said 5 to a particular item, because that really gives you a good proxy for where that's going. We do ask one item about satisfaction. Overall, how satisfied are you with the district as a place to work? And that's kind of our warm-up question on the survey. And then it's followed by the 12 core engagement questions. And then we did 5 additional questions for your district at the request of your staff. And I'll walk through that as well. So how do we get from 180 questions down to 12 questions? Well, you don't just go through and delete a bunch of them, although there's times when you could just look at the statistics and say, let's do that. We've got some real criteria about how we got to those 12 elements. And I've just been with Gallup for 14 or 15 years, so some of this work, much of this work happened even prior to my time with the organization, which is nice because for me, the 12 questions of engagement have been consistent throughout my career at Gallup. So I've been able to build some understanding about those items over time. A typical question on an employee survey is, I feel I'm paid the right amount. But what you notice there is when you look at the productivity of the work groups, where the dark green is the more productive work groups and the light green is the less productive work groups, regardless of what type of industry and how we measure productivity, whether that's in terms of customer ratings or student performance, or whether that's in terms of days missed of work or sick days or different kind of things we can look at. On a question like, I feel I'm paid the right amount, we see a nice distribution, but there's not much of a pattern there. It doesn't sort based on performance of that work group or what success looks like. When you get to a question like, at work I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day, you really do start to see a pattern. Now, it's not perfect. I mean, there's a few kind of outliers where there's a less productive work group that might rate that item high, at least at one point in time. Or maybe there's a more productive work group who rates it a little bit lower right now because it's a process for all of us. But you start to see a real clear pattern where it sorts on performance. It links to those measures that matter for the team. And maybe most importantly, it's something that can be locally acted on. I would love to say that there's a simple strategy. As a district, you can say, we're going to tweak this one thing and it's going to create engagement across the district. In reality, you've got 70-some stories of engagement, one for each school. You've got dozens of teams of employees in this building and on this campus who come to a workplace and have needs that are unique to their local environment. So we'll talk a lot today about the overall, where's the district at as far as a baseline measure. But the real story is going to be school by school. And the real conversations and action planning have to happen at that local level. If I'm at a middle school or a high school or an elementary school or one of your teams here, the story of my local work group is how I identify with my job, not so much how the district is overall. That's important and helpful in terms of context, but action is at the local level. Any questions about that? Maybe I'll pause there and make sure that kind of makes sense in terms of background before we launch into your data. Is that okay? Okay, good. So these are the 12 questions. There's kind of an eye chart on the screen. You've got these in different places in your handout, but I just want to point out a couple of things. I referenced the extreme language that we have in terms of engagement. You see a couple of items here I'll call out. Item number 3 says, at work I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. It doesn't say, at work I have the occasional opportunity to do something I enjoy. Because that's an easy item to say 5 to. I mean, we can always find something good about the work we're doing. We're asking about, is it a regular daily occurrence? Now, it doesn't mean every day is an easy day on the job, or you never have to do anything you don't like. Our founder used to talk about cheers and chores. And we all have to do some things we love and some things we get to do anyway. But are you creating opportunities for that to be a regular occurrence? Question number 5 says, my supervisor, comma, or someone at work, comma, seems to care about me as a person. I call out that item because I don't want you to see this as a principal evaluation metric, particularly not in a baseline year. This is, where are things at with the team? This is not, we don't say, please think of your principal as you answer the following questions. We're asking them about their relationship with the work, with the job. Now, the principal probably sets the conditions for that workplace more than any other individual. But we're not saying, please rate your principal. We're saying rate your level of engagement, how you feel about these items. So even on that item, which is the only item that even mentions the supervisor, the principal, the manager in passing, there's an opportunity for someone else to care about them as a person. Question number 4, in the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. Boy, that feels like a pretty regular occurrence. The point is, it's not just an annual awards banquet, which are great, and I believe you had one last week. I mean, it's important to have big-time recognition on an occasional basis, but what does recognition look like on a more intentional daily basis? For some teachers, it means having a parent who stops by and says thank you, or having a kid who gives them a hug after class, even if that's, that kid just needed that day, and that's great feedback, and it helps them reconnect to the mission of the work they do. To see a former student succeed and become excellent at what they do down the road, and maybe show up in the classroom a few years later and thank them. I mean, there's those kind of things. So it's not the principal's job or the manager's job to give recognition to every employee every week. It's their job to create the conditions where that's a regular part of the way we do things here. So, and each of the 12 items, some have more extreme language than others. I have a best friend at work. I mean, some people look at that literally and say, I have one best friend and he doesn't work here, so I can't strongly agree with that. Most people look at that item and say, boy, there's something about depth of relationships, and is it important for us to be real tight with each other, and does work happen faster when that's the case? If we asked, I have a respected colleague at work, the scores would be higher, but it wouldn't sort as well. We tried these out lots of different ways, and that's what we find. So we send out a survey to 4,000 people and analyze all the data, and what do we find? Well, what we find are there's 3 different types of employees, to paint with a broad brush. There's the engaged employees, which are the ones on the left there. These are the ones who give that discretionary effort, who are excited about the work they do. They do everything that's in the job description, but so much more. They love the work they do. They show up at the speech meet even though they're not the forensics coach. They show up at the basketball game because there's a kid there that they have taken a special interest in, or maybe because they like to volunteer at the popcorn stand even though it's not their week to have to do that. They're giving that discretionary effort. They pick up trash on the way into the building even though it's not in their job description to do so, because they have pride in the work that they do. We'd love to have more engaged employees in our economy, especially as you look at the market the last 5 weeks and see what's happening there. I'd like to think what an economic policy could look like if it were about creating more engaging workplaces rather than some of the other things we try to do, or maybe in addition to. So that's our goal. We'd love to have more engaged employees. About half of most workplaces fall in that middle category, the not engaged employees. It sounds negative, and I guess it is because you want to tap into everyone's potential, and that's untapped potential. It's more of a holding pattern. It's a neutral place where you come to them with an extra job and they say, well, I'm kind of busy now. I'll get to it if I can, but why don't you ask around and see if anybody else can do it, and if not, come back and grovel a little bit, and maybe I'll chip in, and then I'll remind you about it every Tuesday for the rest of your life, about the time I stayed late. I'm being a little dramatic, but sometimes that can be the case with those not engaged employees. In some states, the response is, you can't make me, or it's not in my contract, or that kind of thing. In most cases, it's just, I'm really busy and I'll do what's expected, but then I need to get home, or I need to do this. And I'm not saying you shouldn't get home. Like I say, I expect to get home tonight, and there's a lot of things I love about that, but it's giving that discretionary effort and stepping up when it's needed. And then unfortunately, we have that third group of actively disengaged employees who are just kind of looking down their nose at everything. Some of them will look at this project and say, oh, here comes the principal with the new survey, and oh, we're going to have another meeting and talk about our workplace, and we'll see if anything happens. They're skeptical. They need to be won over. They're able to be recruited into that engaged category. It just takes a lot of work. Unfortunately, both the engaged employees and the actively disengaged employees are both recruiting. They just are recruiting in opposite directions. So one of the things we'll talk about in your own data is that ratio of the engaged employees to those who are actively disengaged. We need to see, how can we minimize the active disengagement? It's not practically possible to completely eliminate it. You're always going to have a few employees on any given day who are just not doing well. The items we ask aren't driven by your daily mood as much as they are your overall feeling about your job, but there's always going to be a percentage. But could we get that down to a single-digit percentage of people that are actively disengaged? Could we double the amount of employees who are engaged? We've seen it lots of places, and I believe it's possible here as well. So a couple of comments around context, just to put the numbers in the broader scheme. So we're Gallup. We do these things called polls every night. We ask questions of lots of people about lots of things. One of the things we ask about on a regular basis is how engaged you are in your work. And so we do a random sample of the U.S. workforce, 18 or older, and say these 12 questions, and we ask on a 1 to 5, just like we do on your staff survey. And what we find is only 30% of the U.S. workplace is engaged in their job. Now, we also tend to see Gallup's first-year clients, which includes you, tend to be about like our U.S. workforce. So your data are very close to this. We're about 30% of employees rate that they're engaged. They're all things going well. They're really tapping into their potential. Things couldn't be better, and they're recruiting more people with that same mindset. Unfortunately, funny thing about numbers, if 30% are engaged, that means there's 70% that are either not engaged or that are actively disengaged. So I look at that dark shaded part of the chart there, and I say that's our potential. That's what is possible if every employee on our payroll were engaged. Imagine if 100%, which again, practically might not be possible, but let's say instead of 30% it were 50 or 60 or 70%. That's hundreds of employees additional, dozens in every school that could step up a category. And again, this is true in every district that as we start these relationships, this is what we tend to find. So we see about a 2-to-1 ratio, 70-30, I get more precise, but just in round numbers, there's about a 2-to-1 ratio of those who are engaged to those who are actively disengaged in the work. We'd like that number to be even higher. When we look at great organizations, we can see that number even be 5-to-1, and I worked with an organization last week that's a real outlier that's over 15-to-1. They've got 15 engaged employees for every one actively disengaged. They've still got 100 or so that are actively disengaged, but about 1,500 who are engaged. So, and then there's about 3,000 that are in the middle. So we really want to look at that ratio of engaged to actively disengaged. I mentioned the principal and the manager before, that this is not an evaluation of them, but I will say they're the ones who hold the keys to changing things in the workplace more than anyone else. So our investment through the learning community executive directors and the other directors of the schools and of the departments is to really make sure we're helping them have the right things to take to the schools and take to their teams to drive this conversation at the local level. Just to mention, we've published research lots of places about the relationship to measures that matter for schools and other organizations in top academic journals and Harvard Business Review and so on. We do a meta-analysis, which is, meta just means many, so when you analyze many studies, a study of studies, we find real consistent patterns between the most engaged and the least engaged, top quartile and bottom quartile within the organization, on a range of measures that matter. And again, not all of these apply to any organization. I mean, patient safety is not a big issue within Pasco schools, although if there's an accident through one of the nurses in the schools, then certainly it can create issues. So we'd like to eliminate that, but you'd probably say absenteeism. I mean, how much you spend, I assume, millions of dollars a year on substitute teachers, just because districts your size do that. What if you're able to reduce the amount of absenteeism from your teachers by 20%? Boy, that creates a breath of fresh air in budget season, doesn't it? Or if you were able to reduce the amount of turnover, which could also reduce the amount of money you need to spend in recruiting and onboarding and all that. So anyway, it has a relationship to lots of measures that matter, both in schools and in the broader environment. I'm going to jump to the one on schools specifically here. If you start off to the right-hand side, student achievement matters. Now, there's folks in Tallahassee and capital cities all around the country who believe they know differently about student achievement and what matters than maybe those who are closer to the action, and I'll stop there. But let's all agree that we want our students to achieve. We want them to read, we want them to do well in math, we want them to succeed academically. So what are the drivers of student achievement? Well, a big one is student engagement, which is why we've chosen to measure that and invest in that. So then the question is, what drives student engagement? Well, there's 4 things on the left that drive student engagement. One is the level. We tend to see that elementary schools are more engaged than middle schools, and middle schools and high schools sometimes act alike. Sometimes middle schools are more like elementary than high. But the older the kids are, the less likely they are to be engaged. And the same thing's true with the staff. The larger the school, the more employees, the more dynamics going on there, the harder it is to drive engagement there. And we see that across other workplaces as well. If you manage 100 people in any job, it's harder to engage them all. And we've got one principal in a school with 100 staff. That's a tough job. I'm not saying it's not tough to be a principal in a staff with 40 elementary teachers, but you're a little closer to the action. It's a little closer feel. So we do see that level impacts both staff and student engagement. The number of students in the classroom makes a difference. Again, not as much as some people would like to believe. I'd rather have a fabulously talented, amazing teacher in a room of 40 kids than a miserable teacher in a room of 4. I mean, obviously, but across the board, if we could have smaller classes, it allows us to have time to individualize more, and that'd be great. But again, hard to make that happen without a major levy override. So Another one that matters at the bottom, free and reduced lunch. If it was possible for us to eradicate poverty, that'd be great across the board. I mean, none of us would disagree with that. But it's hard for us to be able to eliminate some of that family educational culture that's negative, that the kids are coming from. There's parents in your district, and unfortunately every other district, that say, why are you wasting your time at school? Why don't you just come do this? You know, where we just really have to start from a negative place and really turn that around. And again, school nutrition makes a difference. If every kid slept well and had a good breakfast, we know they learn more, but that's not the case for every student. So that's a real issue. The one that is easiest to drive in terms of driving student engagement is that teacher engagement piece. If we can create a great place to work for our staff, for our teachers, for our paras, all those who interact with students and support those who do, we know there's a relationship to student engagement, which then carries through and helps the students achieve more. All right, so into your data. Again, as a reminder, this was right before Thanksgiving, November 15th to the 22nd. We did the survey all online. We sent a pre-note to the staff to say, hey, on Monday you're going to get an invite to a survey, and then the notes came directly from Gallup, so it was completely confidential. We never share individual responses with anyone, including your research staff or the superintendent. He was bugging. No, we just would never say, here's the results from this individual. In fact, we make sure there's at least 5 respondents in a group, or we suppress those results. So we really want to make sure that your employees know this is a confidential survey. We do ask them to log in with an employee ID so that we can track and slice and dice the data by tenure and by location and by work group and by discipline and different cuts, because it's helpful for you to understand that. But we never share individual responses. We had a great response rate, 79%. Those of you who are involved with employee surveys know that's an incredible amount. Peggy Jones and her team have been fabulous partners to us throughout. And many of your principals and directors were good about reminding folks that the survey was in the field and your opinion counts. So almost 4,000 respondents. We did a second wave with some of the central office staff and some of your itinerant support staff in the schools, counselors and nurses and so on. Another couple hundred employees that weighed in on the same survey in January. The majority of our conversation and the documents you have in front of you refer to that second bullet point, the vast majority, the school-based staff, those nearly 4,000 that weighed in there. So I talked about how you can be engaged, not engaged, or actively disengaged. When we look at the U.S. working population, again, you see 30% engaged, 52% not engaged, and 18% actively disengaged. So 30% engaged, 70% that have some room to grow. When you look at your results, again, very similar to what we tend to see in the U.S. working population. You're currently at 26% that are engaged, 53% that are not engaged, and 21% that are actively disengaged. So again, to think about what would it look like for us to be an exact proxy of the U.S. working population, well, essentially it's taking 3% who are actively disengaged and reducing that and bumping a few of them up to the engaged and a few up to the not engaged. These results don't surprise me or shock me, because when we look at U.S. working population or first-year clients, this is what we tend to see. Now, the rhetoric is that we're an engaged district and we're an engaged school and all this, but you've never been intentional about measuring it or managing to this in the past. So again, I'll introduce that word baseline and say, this is where we're starting. Now, if the results look exactly the same again next year, then I'll be frustrated about that, because that would cause me to think maybe we weren't supporting you well enough and the ideas didn't cascade and so on. But this is our starting point. When you look at Gallup clients in general, it tends to be pretty similar, a little bit higher, but we have some world-class companies that come to work with us, and we have average companies and we have not average. We have all kinds of different organizations that we work with globally. And so the client database and the U.S. working population tend to look alike. The last bar that I'll show is where I believe that we can be in the next 3 years or so, which is our overall Gallup client database. Look how different the numbers look there. When organizations are intentional about driving engagement, you get what you reward. You get what you manage to. 47% of organizations that we've worked with over time, 47% of employees are engaged, almost half engaged. The not engaged drops to 41%, and actively disengaged drops all the way down to 12%. We see some organizations where it is a single-digit, percentage point there on the actively disengagement, but that ratio of engaged to actively disengaged is a huge driver there. So you see your ratio today is at 1.24 to 1. You've got 1.24 engaged employees for every 1 actively disengaged. I see some organizations where it's less than 1 to 1 or where it's exactly 1 to 1. That's a difficult place to start. You're at a more typical place to start, but if you look in the far right, that 3.91 or 3.9 to 1 ratio where we've got 47% engaged and 12% actively disengaged, that's an even better story. And I think, again, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think as we're intentional about this, practically we'll see good movement towards that, and over a couple of years, I suspect that your results will more reflect our overall database, just because that's how many of you see this for the first time right now, but yeah, please.
How do school districts fall in with all of your other clients? Are school districts, do they tend to start at this point, or is there a difference between organizations in your Gallup surveys?
There's some subtle differences, but big numbers tend to act alike, and we've got a large and rapidly growing database with schools that we work with. We've got an education services database cut. It very nearly reflects the client database cut as well. But because we've added so many large districts to the engagement projects over the last couple of years, the database is growing so rapidly. I prefer to look at the overall database as it's more stable. I don't want to change the way we grade the papers every time we give the test. But that's a great question. Large districts, because again, what we're talking about here is not a phenomenon that's unique to schools. It's about people and jobs. And I don't mean to say schools aren't a unique place to work, because they are, but so are banks, and so are hospitals, and so are government agencies, and so are retail organizations. And when you look at large numbers on average, it tends to look a lot like that. Allison, yeah.
To get that number to 47, how long did it take that?
So that client database includes some first-year clients, but the majority of them have been working with us for 3 to 5 to 7 years. I would say the average length of the relationship with clients there is probably 3 or 4 years. So it's in the foreseeable future. And I mean, there's a line about school reform where school reform is kind of a dirty word to kids who are seniors in high school, because they don't care about what the school is going to be like in 3 years. They care about what it's like right now. So I don't mean to say let's just pause and take our time and let this be a 3 to 5 year plan, because I've got a 3rd grader and he deserves to have a great place to go to school today and tomorrow and the next day. So there is some urgency about it, but when you look at it from a macro perspective across all your schools and all your departments, you're not going to turn everything around at once. It's going to take a little bit of time. And I don't mean that everything needs to be turned around. You've got some schools that are more high in their engagement, some departments that are higher, and it's a range. So again, each school has their story. And answer your question another way, I would suspect that you'll see schools that grow at least double the amount who stay the same or decline from one year to the next. Almost every school is going to make a big jump or some kind of a jump forward from the first year to the second year and so on. And it's that incremental progress they're really after. Some of them are going to jump by 0.5 point in 1 year. So, I mean, we'll study that and see lots of difference. But they're basic needs in the workplace, but you can't just click your heels together and it happens. I mean, it does take real roll up your sleeves work to make it change over time. So this is a real eye chart, and I don't expect you to be able to see what's on the page there, but my point in putting this up there was just to show that this concept of engagement, we get there in 12 different ways. Each element of engagement is a unique thing that can be measured and managed too. And you see across the district that certain items really stand out in terms of engagement, and others kind of lag behind in terms of how you get to your overall score and your overall grand mean and so on. When we put the numbers in context and kind of grade on the curve, we'll put the where they rank in the Gallup database there as well. So if your district were just inserted in the Gallup database, where would it rank on different things? You kind of see where that falls. I'm just going to call out a couple of items on the top end, a couple items that are on the bottom end in terms of how you get to your overall score. The 2 items that are the strongest relative to the other items in your district are the opportunities to learn and grow, and coworkers are committed to quality work. Those 2 items are ones where your employees weighed in at a higher rate than they did on the other items. Again, when we factor in item difficulty. So when you look at just the mean score, the average score on the item, some of those, there's items where the raw number might be higher, but they're easier items. Having a best friend at work is a tough item to score well on. Having your opinions count is a tough item to score well on. There's a couple other items that are easier to score well on, and those actually, the materials and equipment, I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right, and I know what's expected of me at work, are those two very first items on the survey at the foundation of this chart and of the survey. Those are the two items where you've got the most room to grow. So your score today is at the 10th percentile on I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right. And you're at the 13th percentile in terms of I know what's expected of me at work. Meaning that 80 or 90% of work groups out there would rate higher on that item than your staff are currently weighing in. The good news is those two items are a little easier to drive change on than if you had folks who said, you know, the mission or purpose of our organization, if that was an item that really struggled, that's a harder one to get people to connect to your mission. It's easier to say, let's have a conversation about basic expectations. And I've seen in schools a big difference on expectations as it relates to tenure. Those employees who've been with the district for several years have sometimes been forgotten about in terms of basic expectations. We do a great job of onboarding and helping people know what's expected of them at the beginning and making sure they've got the materials and equipment they need to do their work right. But then if you've been here 5 or 7 years, we kind of assume you've got it figured out and you'll find your own way. So we do want to be intentional about looking at that. Yes, question?
Could you tell me what the exact question or statement is with the Learn and Grow and quality?
Learn and Grow is at work. Let's see, let me give you the exact. Learn and Grow is, this last year I've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. And which was your other question? My coworkers are, my associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. Yeah. And so again, we're asking on a 1 to 5 scale where 1 is strongly disagree and 5 is strongly agree. I mentioned something about tenure, and let me jump to that. When we look at engagement across length of service, and so we've got it broken down by less than a year, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, or 10 years or more. This is what we tend to see. So this is the 50th percentile of Gallup's database. Again, it's not where most districts or organizations start, but just to look at what does average engagement look like in our database, you tend to see folks start in a more engaged place. Because look, I was unemployed yesterday and I'm employed today, so that's a good change. You know, I chose the job and you chose me, so that feels good. And we're having a lot of these conversations about what's expected of me and opportunities to learn and grow. And I haven't had to buy my lunch all week. And you know, all these kind of things that we do to cater to new employees. I'm not suggesting we stop doing that, but it appears that we stop doing some of that, right? After the job sets in and you kind of get into a groove, and sometimes some roles have some monotony and it's hard to kind of, you know, I'm going to do this again. And so 3 to 5 years, engagement kind of tends to bottom out. In most organizations, or in the average organization, we then see it start to climb back up from that 5 to 10 and 10 years or more. The perplexing thing to me is that in Pasco, we don't see that climb. This is a ski slope, for those of you from Florida who don't know about ski slopes. We tend to see there be more like the half pipe. There's an Olympic reference. I could go next week. I'd have a better analogy for you there. But you've got somewhat of a cross country or potentially even downhill skiing here, rather than the snowboarding half pipe. So what does that mean? Well, it certainly doesn't mean that you should go to all your employees 10 years or more and tell them to be more engaged. That's not the strategy that will change it. What it should do is cause you to think about, what are we doing with those most tenured teachers? We're looking at professional learning communities. Are long-term, long-tenured teachers embracing these new concepts as much as newer employees? Almost never, by the way, in any school district do people who've been here 10 or 15 years feel like the new idea is a great idea. I mean, they almost always have seen the old way work because they work so hard at it. So it takes a little bit more time and effort, particularly in times of major change like you're going through in this state right now and in the district. You got to be more intentional about how do we bring on some of those more tenured staff. So from a strategy perspective, I'd encourage some focus groups with some of those more tenured staff and say, what would a 5 look like on this item? For some of you, thinking about those of you who've been here a long time. Materials and equipment. We immediately think that means an iPad in every classroom or a smart board or something. Oftentimes it's not about technology. It's often about access to information or knowing what's going to be on the state tests so that we can align our curriculum in the tests. And you know, these kind of basic workplace needs, can trickle into that materials and equipment item, or knowing what's expected of me at work. You've given me this curriculum, but I'm accountable for these results. There's not a real good alignment there. So as those things hopefully come together more and more over time in the state, in the district, and classroom by classroom, I suspect that will help. But there's more intentional strategy school by school that may need to be drawn on as well. Other questions? And I want this to be an ongoing conversation, so if you'd like to pull us back into other conversations, and clearly with many of the district leaders, we'll have ongoing conversations about this. But from an overview perspective, that's kind of the high-level story of engagement. I mentioned 5 additional items we put on your survey. I won't spend as much time on these. You've got in your handout the responses about this, but these are the 5 additional items that we asked. The net promoter item, I'd recommend my school or work site to friends and family is a good place to work, is one that is helpful to know about. Open communication, leaders help me see how changes today will affect my organization's future. And then particularly items 4 and 5 are kind of proxy items for the teacher evaluation and professional development that happens as a result of the evaluation model. So we asked those items. There's similar items to what you asked in the past, although survey scientists would say we can't look at last year's results and this year because we changed the wording, we changed the scale, and so on. The results there, the net promoter item is the strongest of the 5 items. People are more likely to recommend the district as a good place to work than on some of these others. Clearly the communication and leaders helping employees see how changes made today are going to affect their future. There's still some work to do there. Change is hard, communication and transparency is hard, and having people feel like they have access to the information they need in a timely manner is difficult. And employees are reporting in. And again, about half of the respondents on this survey are classroom teachers, and then many of the other support roles and school-based roles, principals, APs, and so on. And then the last 2 items are not entirely dissimilar to what you saw last year. There's a healthy dose of skepticism from particularly the teaching corps about whether student growth measures should be used in evaluations, or potentially how they should be used. And I doubt they've had as much say in that as they'd like to have. And then the last about how the feedback on the Marzano framework helps me grow as a professional. It looks like they're not sure yet. They haven't experienced it yet. Now maybe that's a timing issue where it's still rolling out, but from a baseline perspective, that's the results from your staff. So a couple observations or recommendations, and then real quick into kind of what's next. This is a baseline year, and again, if there's one word that you remember today, that probably is the word to remember. This is a starting point in a long-term process. It's important for us to introduce the concepts. We've shared some video clips, some references that I think will be helpful to your principals and to all your staff in terms of understanding more about these concepts and what to do with it. But we really want people to have a chance to wrestle with this a little bit and accept it and start to take some simple actions. Again, quality and learn and grow were the 2 relative strengths of the district, the 2 items of the 12 that ranked the highest relative to what we would have expected. And then materials and expectations were the 2 that were listed at the bottom of the list that have the most potential, the most room to grow from your baseline results. There's a big range. It varies from one work group to another. It's not a one-size-fits-all strategy where we say the whole district should work on materials and equipment, because some schools probably don't need to. Some schools probably had that as a fine score, and there may be some other items that come to the top for them. So these conversations need to be real individualized as we roll out what to do about this. And then, unlike many other things in education, this is a test you can teach to. These are core beliefs about the workplace that teachers unions and administrators and staff and everybody agrees, I'd like to work there. I'd like to be in a place where I could say 5 to all those items. We've got some clients that take these 12 questions to job fairs and say, if you come work in our district, here's what we're striving to be. We want to create a workplace where you can say, I strongly agree with these 12 things. And it's an aspirational goal and something you work on, but if you really say these are things we believe in and we stand for as a school and as a department, it can really help to change the conversation and change the way it looks. Here's the good news. Doubling engagement is possible. It's practical. We've seen it before. Your results are typical for first-year surveys, and I don't want to be real dramatic about it. It may be a lower score than you tend to see because it's a harder test than you're used to administering, but where you fall is somewhere between the global workforce and the U.S. workforce today. I mean, pretty typical. The median of Gallup's database gets to 47% engaged, and we've got Gallup Great Workplace Awards, which are, I don't like to call it the J.D. Power Award because that's totally different, but this is there's 22 companies, I believe, last year around the world that were noted as Gallup Great Workplaces, great place to work, and we have a big jamboree for them and recognize them and study what they're doing and write books and case studies about it. Those who win the Gallup Great Workplace Award average 63% engaged. So that's practical, that's possible. We have actually had a school district in Texas that was named as one of the Gallup Great Workplace Award winners a couple years ago. So we've seen it in school districts as well, along with the Ritz-Carlton and Stryker and, you know, top banks and things around the world. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's certainly possible to get there.
That's next year.
That's, well,
No, next year.
okay. I'd love to see it. I think it would be a mammoth effort to get there in a year, and I've never seen it before, but I don't want to limit that. I don't want you to feel...
Shoot your goals high, man.
I'm all right with that. Yeah. I want to be practical about it. I don't want to be a wet blanket, but if you grow in your grand mean from you know where you're at today, and you grow by 1/10 or 2/10 of a point, that's a really big deal. It's hard to move 4,000 people anywhere. I mean, it'd be easier to pick up the building and move it across the street than it would to move engagement by 3/10 of a point.
Do you know where the Texas school district started and what numbers?
I don't remember exactly where. There's a school district that we work with about 30,000 or so students in the Midwest that start almost exactly where you're at, and they grew by 3/10 of a point from one year to the next.
How many?
3/10 of a point, about 30,000 students. So a little bit smaller than you are, but similar dynamics in terms of lots of schools and directors and things. That's the best I've ever seen from one year to the next. I mean, that's a mammoth effort, but it's possible. And again, you'll see certain schools that will make big time jumps. It's just hard to get your arms around it for, you know, 5,000 or 6,000 employees at once.
But let me also add, if I may, it's not so much, and I joke about the score. It's not about the score. It has everything to do with the culture of our district and what kind of workplace it is. It's almost, I think you may have showed a slide earlier about, it's like the oxygen we breathe. It's not about what are we going to strategically do to get our score from this grand mean to this grand mean. I don't care about that. What we need to do is what this helps us do is it says this is where, based on the survey results, this is where we are with our grand mean based on all these factors. Now, as an organization, what do we need to do to foster an environment, a culture where people feel appreciated, valued, contributing, and when that starts falling into place, then you see engaged teachers, you see engaged staff, and more importantly, you see engaged students. That's the purpose of everything we've talked about today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that was my question. Is there any, I don't see anywhere where it's really correlating teacher involvement to student, teacher engagement to student engagement.
Yeah.
Student
It was one of
achievement.
those earlier slides.
Yeah. So we've looked at that in other studies within your.
I mean, but within our.
Right, within your data, we haven't run the analysis on that, but if you just look, you know, side by side and ranked, you want to adjust it by level, because again, just looking at the, you know, I don't like when we publish rankings of schools because we often say, well, look, your high schools are at the bottom. Well, everybody's high schools are at the bottom. So you really need to think about differences between elementary, middle, and high school. The relationship between staff and student engagement over a couple of years' time becomes really clear. So in the first year, you'll see some outliers. There's a little more noise in the data. When you study it over time, you really see that relationship.
So you should see, if there's high teacher engagement, you should see high.
Right. Particularly when you've got staff engagement that's at a good place or that's growing in a pretty meaningful way, that's when you really see the student numbers move.
And I guess my question to you is, have you or will you be sharing each school's individual data with their leadership teams?
Yes. And also Gallup is coaching the learning community executive directors, so the conversation at each school
Will be individualized.
but we are also triangulating data because I have my teacher advisory council that meets with me every month. So none of this has been really surprising for us because they have been sharing. But the piece related to materials, they are saying, especially during the transition, that we need different texts that are more aligned with the expectations of the Common Core, more information on texts. They also say that they need more knowledge. That's one of the materials that they talk about. They say this shift is very significant and we need more professional development. And the other piece is technology. They do say that we do not have enough technology. They are better prepared to use it than the number of devices we have. So that does come up frequently.
Madam Chair, also talk about, you have in your packets, you have by school some very, very high level data, as also schools broken down by learning community. So that's sitting on your desk as well.
I mean, is there any explanation? I was looking at Double Branch Elementary, which is really skewed somehow. It has 8% employee engagement, but 90% student engagement, which is just extreme from two opposite ways. Any idea how
Sure.
that would come about?
So I don't know the story of each of your schools, so I'd hesitate to comment particularly about this school or that school because there's a whole lot that happens there besides the results on 2 surveys. So it's arrogant of me to say, well, I know exactly what's happening there, so I'm not going to go there. I would say student engagement is almost always higher than staff engagement as a percentage. We use the same word for both, and there's some similar items in terms of how we measure it, but you'll see your student engagement. It's not uncommon for you to see 40, 50, 60% of your students engaged. If and your staff might be 10, 20, 30%. So they're not exactly the same, again, they're not calibrated on the same scale. That's kind of an outlier though in terms of staff engagement being lower and student engagement being higher. So that may be one of the ones where something may be happening at that school where students are excited about school. They feel like there's teachers who care about them. They feel like they've got best friends at school. Teachers help them feel their schoolwork's important. They believe they're going to graduate. Some of these things we really desire to have, but there's some untapped potential with that staff, which causes me to say, and those of you who've been through StrengthsFinder, I have maximizer number 1, so I ask this question a lot. I wonder how good that school could be if 30% or 40% or 50% of their teachers were engaged. Would it be possible for 90% of students to be engaged, or their graduation rate to jump even more? So I'm encouraged by that when student results are high in spite of staff results that would suggest they might not be. I wouldn't expect that to be the case over time if the staff results don't improve. But I don't know the story of that school enough to comment specifically. But that is kind of an outlier that you probably flagged there. But yeah, you'll typically see the percentages higher for student engagement than for staff.
Considerably higher.
Yeah, because it's a different survey.
That they couldn't be measured at some schools. Why could we?
Yeah, so there are sample size thresholds, partly around confidentiality. There needed to be at least 30 respondents in order for us to calculate the percent engaged. And there need to be at least 100 respondents in order for us to say this percent engaged, this percent not engaged, this percent actively disengaged. So particularly in some of your smaller schools, it's suppressed.
Yeah, but some of them are larger schools and they still couldn't.
They may have had 95 respondents. I mean, they may have been close to 100. But to be able to calculate all 3, maybe I should look at your chart there to make sure I'm looking at the same thing. And you had very good response to the student poll. The results released back in November there. Most of your schools did get a report. You've got a couple, I see a tech center, and there's a couple others who may not have students that call that school home or who are capable of participating in the student survey. But you had very good response rate. As you look at the student engagement, remember the student survey only goes 5th grade through 12th grade. So for most of your elementary schools, that's just 5th grade. So you'll have smaller sample sizes. And while if you were just going to choose one grade to test in an elementary school, maybe 5th grade would be the best because they've experienced probably more years in the school at that point. It's not necessarily perfectly reflective of the whole school. Good questions.
Are
Yeah.
you doing any work with other Florida districts?
I don't work on all of our projects, but I know we've got a couple other districts that are similar to you that we've got relationships with. I know that we've got one that's just going to do a spring survey. Hard to look at spring and fall side by side because schools are very different in the spring than they are in the fall. But their baseline would be in the spring. That contract's not signed yet, so I won't say much more about it. But there's we work with many districts that are about your size and demographic comparisons and things, but are you suggesting something unique about
I'm
the FCAT?
suggesting education in Florida
Yeah.
could be completely different than education in Texas or Mississippi or somewhere else. And so,
I tend to agree from my perspective too.
So I would like to see at some point in time, if you have the data, and it may be a year or two down the road, but
Right.
districts within Florida.
So a month down the road, in March, we're actually going to release on our Gallup.com site. We've just finished a survey now, but a teacher survey about more kind of working conditions. We do have engagement as a part of that. And I believe just based on the sheer number of teachers in the state of Florida, we'll probably be able to report a state level breakdown there. It's not a district report. It's not anything that is part of our contract with you, but we are going to see differences in teacher engagement by state. I'm just sure of it. Yeah.
Mrs. Wise, good question.
I do, just to help me understand what I'm looking at here on the chart. I'm just looking at the one where it lists the schools in alphabetical order. Let's say you were to go down and see Cypress, which has a 3.65, and then you see Denham Oaks, which has a 3.65, but they have different percentages. So can you explain to me the relationship between that first number, the 3.65, and the relationship with the percentage? I'm not sure I understand that.
So I believe, and this is Peggy Jones and her team put this together, but I believe I understand, and if I'm not, please correct me. One is the grand mean, and one is the percent that are engaged. And sometimes you can get to the same grand mean where there's a different percent engaged. Maybe you've got fewer actively disengaged, and so when you combine it all together, the grand mean is just the average of those 12 questions on the employee survey. The percent is the percent that are actually calculated in that engaged category. So if you're only to look at one number, I mean, the one that's easiest to study is probably the grand mean because it's more stable, it's more reflective of all 100% of employees, but also good to know what percent are engaged so we know kind of what's that critical mass that we could draw on.
So when you're looking at those 12 questions plus the 5 additional questions that were added, some of them were the ones that you look at mostly for engagement, or are they all for engagement?
The 12 questions are the ones that we use both for the grand mean and for the percent that are engaged. The 5 additional questions and the 1 overall satisfaction, we report the results, but they're not factored into that calculation. Good question, yeah. Other questions or comments? Thanks for the discussion throughout. There's a few other takeaways or notes in the packet, but if there's other questions, I know we're at 12 or just shortly after. I know we've got a pretty packed agenda, so another question or two I'd be glad to answer.
Anybody?
Is it possible for you to skip some of the slides and go to the student piece because they have to see the student piece, and I want to make sure we have time for that.
Yeah, I've got the student results in there from a summary, just kind of a summary perspective. We also have the district overall student poll results so you've got the student results as columns in the back of the packet that your staff put together on the student poll: hope, engagement, well-being. Those are the 3 constructs we measure on the student survey. When you look at the district overall data, they look very, very similar to the national data. So big numbers tend to act alike, particularly when you look at students across different districts. So there's nothing real dramatic in the district overall results that I see, particularly given, again, that this is your first year measuring and thinking towards how to create hope, engagement, and well-being through this lens. I don't mean that your teachers haven't been attempting to do that, but not as specifically or as intentionally around this. So the items that we asked, there's 20 items on that student survey, and the items are all in the handout there under each of the 3 constructs. So
It explains what hope is.
yeah, so hope is ideas and energy for the future. Engagement, we've talked about with staff. For students, it's the same, and how involved with and enthusiastic they are about school. And well-being is a broader measure of how we think about and experience our lives, kind of more overall. So that, yeah, there's a little bit there, and would be glad to share any other kind of background material on the student poll as well. That's a national poll that we do. Districts can opt in from around the country, and we had almost 600,000 that did back last fall. So it's a convenient sample. It's not a random sample, I should say that, but when you get 600,000 of anything, it starts to represent a bigger picture, right?
Yes. It's probably also noteworthy to the board that the elementary was only 5th grade.
Right, on the student
When
survey.
you look at the numbers for that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Well, and,
No, go ahead, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I was gonna say, when you picture this, you know, the engaged, not engaged, 26% doesn't mean that they're not engaged with their students and in their interaction with students and how they're teaching. So I think it's important that you take
Yeah.
that away.
Yeah, it's a very specific calculation based on 12 survey questions,
Right.
which represent a lot about potential and what can be tapped into and how much better they could be. But some of them are connecting with students in spite of how they might feel about their job today. Our results would suggest over time it's hard to sustain where my basic workplace needs aren't being met, but I still have enough to give to the students. You shouldn't have to choose. I mean, you should be able to go to a great workplace that energizes you rather than avoid all my coworkers and just focus on the kids.
But I think
If a teacher needs to do that, that's okay, but
right.
that's not sustainable.
But since our focus is students and what's best for students, that I think
Absolutely.
for me, I have to separate that part of this, that's unique to this profession as teachers. And
That's right.
they may not feel these other areas, but their interaction with our students is still.
Definitely.
Well, I think that
Definitely.
if I may know, I think that the same thing can be said about education as it is with other types of businesses. Because if you're not happy at work as an educator, then you're not going to be really engaged in delivering quality instruction to your students. Now, that's a general broad brush, but that'd be the case if you're building widgets. If I'm not happy with the quality of work that I'm putting into assembling these refrigerators or widgets is going to be poor. So I think there are some similarities, and that's the reason we wanted to engage Gallup, is to get and I'll reiterate the word baseline, is to get a baseline of where our district is with these 12 questions.
Right.
At this, it's a snapshot in time. My hope is that when we come back in next February of 15, that we're going to see slight modest improvement.
Your hope is that it just
My
triples.
hope, my hope is that it just knocks it out of the park. But again, it's not about the numbers. It's truly about the work environment, the culture of our school district. And that's one of the things that I, as a superintendent, had committed to this board that we wanted to do as a team, and that was improve the work environment for our teachers. Because I am convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that when our teachers feel good about themselves, when they feel good about coming to work, when they feel engaged with their students, they will deliver. And those students will, I believe, will just perform like we've never seen them perform before. Now, what's important to me is that when you look at hope, engagement, and well-being, these are in fact predictors of future success. This is the second piece, if you will, is that why do we look at hope, well-being, and engagement? Is because we can in fact look at these numbers and we can see, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Larson, but we can see how successful our students are going to be in the future. You look at our graduation rates, and you can almost mirror the disengaged, the actively disengaged kids with our graduation rate. So there is a direct correlation. We're not using this as the gospel, but what we are using it for is as a benchmark for us to look at our systems, our culture, our organization, our supports that we're providing back to our teachers in the classroom, our supports back to our students, and saying, how can we improve your hope, your well-being, your engagement as students? How can we improve or increase your engagement as instructional staff, as a teacher, as staff throughout the district. Because we believe when all those pieces align and they click, we're gonna see some great things happening in the Pasco district, greater things happening in the Pasco district. That's all
My concluding comment, although I love numbers and dream in syntax, there's faces behind the numbers, and our goal is that you use the data to drive better conversations and more open discussion about what would it look like to be in a great place to work, or how can we better engage our students. And hopefully this introduces some proven language and some ideas that, that you'll beg, borrow, and steal from and use to make the district even better. So appreciate a chance to share some ideas and your engagement throughout.
Thank you
For
very
a
much.
great
for your time.
presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.